Please like, comment, subscribe, and support.
I got a question for you.
Shoot.
I am a big super Linux nerd, and I'm just
Okay,
kind
I'm
of
not
curious.
going to talk to you anymore. Can you mute
What's
him?
your opinion? What's your opinion? What is your opinion on the whole Linux world coming from a Microsoft world?
Okay. So, okay, this is a tough one. Boy, you spent 3 hours on this one. But in a nutshell, Linux is stupid and nobody should run it. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to say that. No, actually, I have a couple VMs that I run Linux on. The only reason it's not going to be mainstream is because it's such an open source platform that basically everybody out there that's doing development for it, there's not a lot of money in it. Closed platforms generally bring in more revenue, and they also offer more paid support to the companies. Like, let me give you an example. Microsoft would work directly with Adobe and dedicate hundreds of thousands of dollars of resources to Adobe in the form of developers and everything to make sure that their stuff ran flawlessly on the Windows operating system. With Linux, you're not going to get that because Linux doesn't pull in enough money unless you're talking about some of the rare distributions like Red Hat and stuff like that, where they do bring in enough money through the support side of things that they could maybe do a venture like that every once in a while. But I think for the most part, because Linux is so free, you're not going to see companies that are trying to make huge amounts of money gravitating to it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I mean, when you have an operating system that has, I don't know, 400 different ways it's going, and people are like, well, okay, I want to do it, but what's the difference between this Linux, this Mint, this Debian, all these different divisions?
Gen
it's
2,
like too many choices.
No, it's absolutely insane. Like, you do a search for Linux distribution, like a Wikipedia page comes up that's like 3 pages long. And it's just a giant like spreadsheet of every single distribution like ever made, and like most of them are like still around and still being maintained. And then a lot of them use different types of packet managers for installing software. A lot of them have compilers and packages inside of them that compile some things, whereas the other ones you have to add in those packages to compile those things. So realistically, I think for Linux to become mainstream and be a true competitor for the desktop. Now, the enterprise is a completely different story. Linux dominates the enterprise because in the enterprise, you have skilled workers that know what they're doing, that know how to work around all these things. And it's cheaper to basically pay them to maintain your enterprise and get the software for free than it is to go buy, like, say, Windows enterprise level licenses and a staff to support it. So that's why most people tend to go to Linux and Apache route for web serving. But as far as the desktop, you just have way too many options. Because I've actually installed 3 different Linux distributions before where I was completely proficient in one, which Debian's probably the one that I'm most proficient in. But then I'd go over and install, like, what was that? Mint was one of them, and then there was another one that was super hugely graphical that I installed, and I seriously couldn't even find, like, the display settings. It was that different. I was oh, man. So that's why I think what they need to do is all the Linux distributions need to get together in a room and be like, guys, we need to just do, like, a standard desktop like X11 or GNOME or something and just standardize on it and say that's going to be the standard that we all offer default on these distributions. And then once they all synchronize together and everybody's running the same distributions, has the same default packets installed, the same compiler installed, if they did that across the board, then I think more companies like Steam, for instance, and the game library and Adobe and stuff would be way more willing to produce software for those platforms, knowing that it would seamlessly work on all the distributions instead of knowing they have to tweak it for each one.
When I met Puget Systems at Linux Fest in Washington in the spring, they told me, I'm like, well, what kind of people get these Linux computers? And they said people who do high scientific work. Like, I don't know what they meant by that, but
it's because scientists are poor. That's why. So scientists are very poor people.
But the machines that Puget builds they're not cheap systems.
They showed me an AMD build that they were doing that had 4 8-core CPUs in it, and it had 128 gigabytes of RAM, and it didn't even have a graphics card in it. Like literally, it didn't even need a graphics card because they were literally just plugging in a USB thumb drive that booted the operating system and just ran computations and then saved the data off. So it was like there was no need to have a display, there was no need to have a keyboard, nothing. It was just a computing box. And because it was AMD, it was dirt cheap to run. The Linux distribution, of course, was free, so there was no cost for the license. And when you're talking about science, you want as much money to go into the actual research as possible. So it makes, if they can save, thousands of dollars on corporate licensing for operating systems like OS 10, or I guess OS 10, you'd have to actually run exclusively on Apple hardware to not be violating their EULA. But let's say Windows, you go put Windows on there. you're going to have to pay for that, or you could take that money that you saved from the operating system license and put that towards better hardware. And with Linux, you can configure Linux down to bare metal to where you don't have a lot of overhead, which means you're even dedicating more memory and more CPU to your computational operations instead of to run your, you know, background services that like monitor your display driver and allow people to, you know, hit 139 and crash your box.
I don't know about AMD because I don't know, doing that kind of work, you don't want it freezing up on you every hour.
That's true.